Buchanan, and the so-called realists, President Bush Sr., some members of Kissinger Associates, the greater number of them actually, Lawrence Eagleberger, and Brent Scowcroft, whose summary of the recent status quo in the Middle East is that, say what you like about it, it was 30 years of peace. Suck on that, if you like, as a statement of realism. And others. And I think it's right that the argument be counterposed between, as it were, the radical and conservative point of view. In 1989, when the collapse of the communist system occurred, it seemed to many people, including for a while myself, that the era of the one-party state and the one-leader state was finally over, and the one-state ideology. Certainly with the final end of Nicolae Ceausescu, it seemed possible that we had escaped that model, and that politics from then on could be rational. You remember there was talk even of a peace dividend at that time, of the possibility of really paying attention with our resources and our techniques to long overlooked problems in Africa and elsewhere, and with huge new frontiers of possibility in medicine and in science, and above all, a rough consensus on the idea of democracy. I once calculated how long that period, which some called, partly optimistically, partly pessimistically, the end of history, had actually gone on. I can't remember now precisely how many days of it we had. About 130, I think, of the new era, until Slobodan Milosevic invaded Bosnia, and Saddam Hussein did not invade Kuwait, but as you should and no doubt do remember, annexed, abolished, fully occupied, took possession of it, made it a part of Iraq, the unprecedented assault on the principle of the United Nations, the abolition of one of its member states, also a full member in good standing of the Arab League, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the Islamic Conference. This was followed by the nightmare of Rwanda, which the international community did nothing to prevent, by the slow and unnoticed acquisition by North Korea and Iran of thermonuclear weaponry, and behind it all lurking the deadliest threat of all, and the one that combines in its most horrible way the concept of the one leader with the one God and the one state and the one new empire and caliphate, the ideology of Islamic fascism. Now the question really is a macro one, therefore, in my opinion, my submission to you, ladies and gentlemen. The macro one is this: is it or is it not the case that coexistence between the United States of America and its allies and regimes of one-party, theocratic or totalitarian ideology with expansionist and aggressive practices is impossible? I submit that if it isn't impossible, it ought to be impossible, because it is most certainly undesirable. We are here today, partly, but I think only partly, to argue about the rationale of the recent hostilities in Iraq. The truth of the matter is that every blunder that's been made in this period, in this epoch since 2001, is the consequence of having compromised for too long with the continued existence in power of Saddam Hussein, with, in other words, the private ownership of a very important country and a very long-suffering people by a psychopathic mafia. The shame of the United States policy is to have tolerated that for too long. The shame of the United Nations is to have tolerated that too long. The shame of the European Union is to have tolerated that for far too long. There is a faction, of which I'm proud to be a member, that says this coexistence was wrong, that 1991 should have seen the end of Ba'ath Party rule in Iraq, that if there's going to be an inquest, and if there's going to be a post-mortem and a full accounting of our policy in Mesopotamia, and there should and must and will be one, then it has to begin no later than 1991, though I would myself backdate it to the decision by that heroic Nobelist and Baptist, Jimmy Carter, to encourage Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran in 1979, the fons et origo of all of our troubles in this region. I don't want to outpace Scott Ritter's very polite and condensed introduction, so I'll close on this observation and then we'll begin to exchange. On this point of the legality of assuming the right to change the government of another state, I think there are 4 points that absolutely must be borne in mind. A state is deemed to have lost its sovereignty and to have become subject to intervention and regime change on one of 4 conditions: that it has violated the Genocide Convention, of which we are signatory. Genocide Convention mandates that in the case of the advice of an attempt to destroy in whole or in part a national or ethnic group, that action be taken either to prevent or, if that's not possible, to punish that action. That's an obligation. International law further states that a state has lost its sovereignty if it gives aid and comfort and harbours, aid and comfort to, I should say, and harbours forces of international gangsters and non-state actors who engage in indiscriminate violence against civilians, in other words, if it commits repeated aggressions against neighbouring states or occupations of their territory, and of course, if it violates the Non-Proliferation Treaty or is in other ways discovered to have been fooling around with weapons of mass destruction. Iraq has violated all four of these very important precepts, or under the leadership of Saddam had violated them several times. Another confrontation with the Saddam Hussein regime was inevitable. I've never heard a single argument from anybody who says that that contingency was an avoidable one. Another round with that regime, imploding even as it was, and becoming more dangerous as it imploded, was a sure thing. The question you have to face, and face as if you had to take the decision yourselves, not as spectators, not as consumers, not as mere onlookers, as if you had to take it yourself. The decision you have to make is this: who should determine the timing of that next inevitable confrontation? Should it again be left to Saddam Hussein, as it was when he decided to use the weapons of genocide on the people of Kurdistan, as it was when he invaded Iran, as it was when he abolished the existence of Kuwait? Or was it time, and long past time, for democratic nations, and for democratic forces within them to insist, no, that we will decide the timing this time, and we will move Iraq into the post-Saddam era, and we will free its people from their appalling imprisonment, and we will certify their state as disarmed, which could not be certified other than by regime change, and we will prevent it from being used as a launching pad and training ground for gangsters from Abu Nidal on down. As I say, I think that decision was taken long overdue and in some ways incompetently, but I'm extremely proud to have associated myself with that side of the argument, and I'm going to maintain that till the last dog dies tonight. Thanks for coming.
Unless Scott changes your mind. We can't tell the future, but
all must be doubted, and all is available for dialectical rationalizing.
I'm sure you have something to say. But Christopher, do you think there was at the time of Bush's invasion, at the time of his attack, do you feel that Saddam still retained a credible ability to inflict damage on other countries in the United States?
What I wrote in my short book on the subject, which is called, for the curious, strangely neglected book, A Long Short War, The Postponed Liberation of Iraq, which takes the war as continuous between 1990 and 2005. It was this: that the threat of weapons of mass destruction in 2003 from Iraq was, as I put it, latent, not blatant. Thanks to the military victory in 91 and the work of UNSCOM afterwards, under the leadership of my friend Rolf Ekeus and with active participation from Scott Ritter, it was possible to account for quite a number of those weapons, even though a ministry of concealment was still in operation in Baghdad, led by Hussein, a ministry for deception of inspectors. Since the invasion itself, we found things that we weren't even looking for, that we didn't know to accuse them of. For example, a plan, we have all the documents of it, in March 2003, a Ba'ath Party delegation going to Damascus to meet with the envoys of Kim Jong-il to buy North Korean missiles with longer range than was permitted by the inspections off the shelf. We didn't know they were even trying that. We know that now. The nuclear centrifuge, the elements of which were buried in the garden of Dr. Mahdi Obeidi, Saddam's chief nuclear physicist, and were by him unearthed. He led the Marines to where he'd buried it under the orders of Qasai Hussein. So, yes, of course, as long as Saddam Hussein was in power, it was not possible ever to relax, and certainly not if you were a neighboring country. It was an unsleeping attempt to keep together what resources he could for a better day as the sanctions regime was breaking down, which it was. But don't forget that when I was arguing for regime change in Iraq in 2003, I was confronted every day by spokesmen of the anti-war movement who said, you can't do it. You can't attack Iraq now. You can't move your troops across that border. They'll all be killed. They'll all be killed by Saddam's poison gas weapons. They'll all be killed by his anthrax. That was the regular argument made in people